It was June 3rd, 1969, and the morning light slanted through our kitchen window like golden syrup dripping slow over a pancake stack. I was 10 years old, already cross-legged on the carpet of our living room, still in my striped pajama pants and a faded, groovy t-shirt with a stretched neckline. Our house, a small two-bedroom just off the quieter end of Sycamore Street, always smelled like a mixture of instant coffee, floor wax, and whatever was coming out of the toaster that morning. That particular Tuesday, it was brown sugar cinnamon Pop-Tarts, a rare treat in our house, toasted just enough to burn the edges. Sally, my 5-year-old half-sister, was plopped beside me in her footy pajamas, still clutching her little cloth Penny the puppy doll, the one with one ear almost chewed off. She always had this tiny way of sitting, like she was trying not to take up too much room, even though she had a tendency to sprawl sideways halfway through the show. We'd both staked our spots right in front of our old Zenith console TV, which sat like a proud wooden cabinet in the corner of the room, humbly wearing its layer of dust. Its rotary dial made a satisfying click, click, click as we turned past the UHF channels to find the right station. Channel 3, our trusted CBS affiliate. We were waiting for Captain Kangaroo. Now, I don't know if kids today will ever understand what it was like to wait for your favorite show. Not stream it, not pause it, not even record it, but to actually wait. It was a kind of reverence. You got up early, you ate fast, and you shut your mouth when the theme song started, or you risked missing the best part. Our routine was sacred. Captain Kangaroo came on around 8 a.m., right after the morning farm report and some guy talking about tractor parts. The room we sat in wasn't much, but it was everything to us. The wallpaper had started to peel by the windows, and the beige paint underneath was scribbled with our own indoor graffiti. Hydrocore streaks, crayon doodles, and Sally's ambitious attempt at drawing a horse that looked more like a squashed antelope. Mom would yell about the walls sometimes, usually on Sundays when she tried to clean, but most of the time she'd sigh and say, "Well, at least you two are creative." Dad didn't really care. He was usually too busy fussing with his Chevy Corvair in the driveway or listening to Paul Harvey on the kitchen radio. That morning, Dad had already left for work at the plant, his thermos of coffee and metal lunchbox in hand, and Mom was in the kitchen, humming along to Frankie Valli playing faintly from the AM radio on top of the fridge. The smell of her Aquanet hairspray still hung faintly in the hallway, mixing with the toaster heat and making my eyes sting a little. I remember checking the TV clock, 7:59 a.m., and nudging Sally with my elbow. She perked up and whispered, "He's coming." She always whispered that, like it was Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny. For her, Captain Kangaroo was magic. His soft-spoken voice, those oversized pockets, and the gentle chaos of Mr. Moose and Bunny Rabbit. I liked the show too, but I was starting to feel a little too old for it. Still, I watched it because Sally did, and because, I don't know, it still made me feel calm, safe, like everything in the world was just fine for half an hour. But then something happened. Instead of the bright yellow CBS-I and the upbeat intro music, we got gray screen fuzz. Just static. No captain. No anything. I leaned forward and turned the knob back and forth. Click, click, click. But nothing. Just that empty screen humming with boredom. At first we thought maybe it was just a momentary glitch. Maybe they were running late. Sally looked at me, her eyes wide, her bottom lip already starting to tremble. I remember feeling that deep unease, like when the ice cream truck drives past your street without stopping. "Where is he?" she asked. "I don't know. Maybe they're fixing something." And then, just like that, she started crying. Not loud, not dramatic, but that soft, disappointed kind of crying that only a little kid can do, like her heart had actually cracked. She clutched her doll tighter, curled her legs up under her, and buried her face in the armrest of the couch. And here's the truth. I didn't know what to do. 10 years old and already facing an emotional crisis before breakfast. I thought about getting Mom, but she was humming and humming and humming in the kitchen, completely unaware of the tragedy unfolding 2 rooms away. So I did what any big brother would do. I told her a story. I said maybe Captain Kangaroo was visiting schools that day. Maybe he'd be on later, or maybe he was stuck in traffic. "You know," I said, "sometimes even TV guys need a day off." She didn't buy it. She just cried harder. I reached under the coffee table and pulled out our old Tupperware of crayons, the lid permanently warped from sitting too close to the heat vent last winter. I grabbed the fattest crayon I could find, electric blue, and said, "Hey, what if we draw the captain ourselves today?" She looked at me, blinking. her cheeks shiny. "You mean on the wall?" she asked. I paused. "Yeah," I said. "On the wall. Just this once. I'll draw him and you draw Bunny Rabbit." We got up, pulled the couch back, and started sketching on the big blank spot behind it. We worked in silence, save for the scratch of waxy tips against drywall. Sally's Bunny Rabbit looked more like a mutant potato, but she was proud of it. I gave the captain a giant hat and 2 stick legs. We were halfway done when suddenly, boom, the picture snapped on. There he was, Captain Kangaroo, in full color, smiling, alive, like nothing had ever gone wrong. Sally gasped, dropped her crayon, and ran back to the floor in front of the TV. She sat perfectly still, eyes wide, arms wrapped around her knees. I joined her, crayon still in hand. We didn't talk. We didn't even blink much. We just watched. The show was already 10 minutes in, but it didn't matter. He was there. That morning taught me something strange and small and important. Sometimes the world stutters. Sometimes it skips a beat, or a show doesn't start on time, or someone you love starts crying and you have to draw a captain on the wall just to make it better. But then the picture comes back. It always comes back. Even now, over 50 years later, I can still see that moment. That drawing is long painted over. That Zenith TV is probably rusting in some landfill, and Sally? She's got 3 kids and a mortgage now. But I swear, when I walk past a fuzzy screen or hear a low hum from a distant speaker, I remember that Tuesday, the one where she cried, the one where I drew on the wall, the one where we waited, and the captain finally showed up. By the summer of 1974, things had changed, though not everything. I was 15, that awkward age where you're not a kid, but definitely not whatever comes next. Sally was 10, all knees and elbows and pigtails, still following me around like I was a movie star. And even though she'd traded in Captain Kangaroo for the electric company and the occasional episode of Zoom, she still remembered that morning 5 years back. The day the captain didn't come on. The day she cried. Our house hadn't changed much. Still that same 2-bedroom on Sycamore, same faded living room carpet with the Hot Wheels burns and juice stains, and those old wall scribbles that had now taken on the air of archaeology. We never painted over them. At some point, Mom gave up trying. She said they had character. So there we were, surrounded by 5-year-old horse mutants and electric blue stick figures, relics of a time when Saturday mornings meant everything. But 1974 brought something new, a neighbor with a VCR. Now, if you weren't there, it's hard to explain what kind of sorcery that machine seemed like. It was huge, silver, with clunky buttons that made ka-chunk sounds and reels that spun like the reels on spy computers in old James Bond flicks. Mr. Harris from across the street had it. He worked for the phone company and was the kind of guy who had magazines like Popular Mechanics stacked like bricks in his garage. I remember the first time he invited us over to watch a tape. He had recorded the $6 Million Man, and Sally swore she heard a neighbor say it had commercials you could fast forward through. My brain practically fried at the thought. Back at our house, we still had the old Zenith, though now with some weird plastic screen enlarger that Dad bought at Montgomery Ward. It was basically a magnifying glass with suction cups, and it made everyone on TV look like they were melting. We never had a VCR. Dad said it was too expensive and too futuristic. "We don't need to record life," he said once. "We're already living it." But to a 15-year-old in 1974, recording a TV show felt like owning time itself. Sally and I tried to invent our own way of taping things. We'd sit close to the TV with our portable tape recorder, the kind with the little built-in mic, and try to capture audio from the shows we loved. It was a disaster. The dog barked. The phone rang. Mom vacuumed. But we didn't care. We'd lie on the floor afterward and listen back to muffled conversations from the Brady Bunch or the theme song from Happy Days, smiling like we'd just made history. It was around that time that Sally got really into drawing. Not the old chaotic kind from the wall days, but actual drawing. She had a set of colored pencils from KB Toys with a little sharpener built into the box. She'd lie on her stomach, elbows bent, tongue peeking out of her mouth, sketching pictures of our TV heroes. Fonzie, Wonder Woman, even Oprah, who was just starting to show up on those regional morning shows. Sally saw the world in cartoon colors, and she drew the way she saw it. One rainy Saturday afternoon, we were both stuck inside. The TV was on the fritz, again, and the antenna wasn't cooperating. Dad was out in the driveway messing with the Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme, radio playing Creedence Clearwater Revival too loud. Mom was trying to bake a Jiffy Pop cake and muttering about humidity. I sat on the floor flipping through a Mad magazine, Sally sketching away beside me. "I wish we had a tape of Captain Kangaroo," she said out of nowhere. I looked at her, surprised. "You still think about that?" She nodded. "He was the first person on TV that felt real, you know? Not loud, not crazy, just safe." I didn't say anything at first, but I knew exactly what she meant. Then she added something I'll never forget. "You were real too. That day, when I cried, you didn't laugh. You drew with me." I felt a lump in my throat, the kind you pretend isn't there when you're 15 and trying to seem tough. I gave her a little push on the shoulder, half a smile. "Well, don't get used to it." But deep down, I was proud. That moment, one I barely remembered, had etched itself into her like one of her drawings. That summer, we never did get our own VCR, but we made tapes of sorts, cassette audio of TV themes, hand-drawn cartoons of our favorite scenes, even a few Polaroids of the TV screen. Though Dad complained we were wasting film, we invented our own nostalgia in real time, and when the power finally came back on that night and the TV buzzed to life again, we didn't even care what was on. We just sat together, Sally resting her head on my shoulder, both of us bathed in the warm flicker of whatever rerun happened to be playing, because by then, it wasn't about the shows. It was about remembering, and being remembered. It was 1979, and I had just turned 20. There's something about that age, the way it hovers between who you were and who you're supposed to become. It was a warm July morning, the kind where the sun seemed to roll in like a lazy dog across the porch, and I found myself back on that same beat-up couch in our living room, the one with the collapsed middle cushion and a rip in the armrest where Sally had once hidden a bonkers candy stash. The wall behind it still held the faint ghosts of our childhood drawings, faded crayon loops, lopsided stars, one crooked Captain Kangaroo sketch, his hat smeared and melting from the time the radiator leaked and steamed the drywall. Most of it was covered now by a poster of John Travolta from Grease curling at the edges, but I knew what lived behind it. Sally did too. She was 15 then, legs longer, voice sharper, always sketching in the margins of her notebooks, drawing comic versions of our neighbors, or mocking up her dream dorm room for the art school she talked about constantly. She walked differently now, more confident, but she still had that same habit of chewing the inside of her cheek when she was thinking. I recognized it right away. That day, she flopped down next to me, holding a box of Pop Rocks and a fresh sketch pad. "You working today?" she asked, popping the candy like it was medicine. "Not till 5, I said. I'd been doing evening shifts at the Montgomery Ward warehouse, unloading shipments of toasters and Oster blenders in boxes that smelled like cardboard and hot glue. It wasn't much, but it was something. I was saving up for a car, a used Pontiac Firebird I'd seen down at Lou's Auto, the kind of thing that made you feel like Burt Reynolds, even if you were sweating through your shirt and stuck in traffic. The TV was on, humming gently, dialed to Channel 8. They were rerunning episodes of Three's Company, and Sally laughed every time Mr. Furley entered the room like he'd just been hit with a cattle prod. I leaned back, hands behind my head, watching the dust motes float through the sunlight slicing across the room like something out of a dream. Then she said, almost like a whisper, "You remember the captain?" It caught me off guard. I didn't have to ask who she meant. "Yeah," I said. "I remember." She paused, looking down at her sketch pad. "I cried that day. You didn't laugh at me." "Nope. You drew with me." "Yep." She smiled, quiet. "That was the first time I knew you weren't just some annoying big brother." I smirked. "That was the first time I knew I could draw a decent hat." We both laughed, but behind it was that ache, the one that only shows up when you realize you're not kids anymore. We sat like that a while, the smell of burnt toaster waffles still hanging in the air from breakfast, the soft rumble of the floor fan turning side to side like it was watching us. That summer, things felt like they were shifting, not dramatically, just in those subtle, creeping ways. Sally got a part-time job at the ice cream counter in the Woolworths, and I started looking at classifieds for apartments closer to the city. Mom was clipping coupons from the TV guide, and Dad spent most of his days tinkering with a broken CB radio out in the garage, convinced he could tune in to Canada if he got the wiring just right. The world was changing too. Disco was fading. Rock was getting louder. and nobody talked about Captain Kangaroo anymore. He was still on, sure, but less often, and with none of the sparkle he once had. Sally had stopped watching years ago, but every now and then I'd catch her flipping past it, pausing just for a second before moving on to Dallas or Solid Gold. One night that summer, after a long shift, I came home and found her sitting in the dark, sketch pad in her lap, tab can on the floor next to her. The TV screen was black, but she was staring at it like something might still appear. "You okay?" I asked. She shrugged. "Just thinking." I sat beside her. She held up her drawing. It was the captain again, only older. Wrinkles around his eyes. Same gentle smile. "I thought he might age with us," she said. "But I guess he didn't." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. We sat there a long time. That was the last summer we spent much time in that house together. That fall I moved out. Sally started high school. The couch got replaced. The scribbles on the wall were finally painted over. Mom said it was time. But I took pictures before she did. A whole roll of Kodak, just of that wall, that mess, that history. And every now and then when I flip through that old photo album with the plastic peel-back pages, I see that blue crayon captain, Sally's bunny rabbit potato, and I feel it all over again. The hum of the zenith, the click of the dial, the smell of toast and carpet, the sound of my little sister crying, and the silence that followed when I decided to sit beside her instead of teasing her. In 1979, we didn't tape our shows, but we held on to the important parts anyway. They're still there, right where we left them. By the time 1982 rolled around, I was 23, living in a one-bedroom apartment above a Thrifty's in a town just far enough from home to feel grown, but close enough that I could still make it back for Sunday dinner if I wanted to. I had a job selling CB radios and stereo systems at a strip mall electronics shop that used to be a Woolco, before they tore it down and replaced it with something colder, sleeker, more fluorescent. Even the old fountain in the middle of the mall, where kids used to toss pennies and make wishes, had been ripped out and replaced with a shoe display. I still visited the old neighborhood sometimes, especially when I was feeling off. You know that kind of ache you get when the world moves too fast? That bone-deep itch for something soft and slow and familiar? That's when I'd drive my hand-me-down Cutlass Supreme, windows halfway down, cassette of REO Speedwagon playing too loud, and just cruise the old streets. Past the baseball field where we once played until the mosquitoes chased us home. Past the faded remains of Al's Arcade, where we spent our allowances feeding asteroids and Pac-Man. Past our old house. The new owners had painted it. The front porch was blue now, the shutters white. The big oak tree in the yard, where Sally and I once tried to build a tree house but only managed one wobbly step, was gone. And the window I used to press my face against every Saturday morning waiting for cartoons now had vertical blinds instead of that thin orange curtain Mom had sewed back in '72. But what really broke me was when I walked past one day and realized the wall was gone. I don't mean the actual structure, I mean the drawings, the crayon graffiti, the electric blue captain, all of it, painted over, erased, just beige now, smooth, silent. I stood across the street for a long time, staring. I must have looked like a creep, a guy in a members-only jacket staring at someone else's house, someone else's walls. I wanted to knock. I wanted to ask if they'd ever noticed the shapes beneath the paint, if they'd ever felt something stir in the air when they turned the TV to static and waited for a voice that never came. But I didn't. I just stood there until a light came on inside and I figured it was time to go. Later that night, back in my apartment, I dug through an old shoebox in my closet. The one marked, "Stuff, do not trash." Inside were things I hadn't touched in years. An old Knight Rider sticker, a dried-up space dust candy packet, some Mad magazine clippings, and, folded carefully between two pieces of notebook paper, a photo, the wall, the drawing, our captain, still smiling. I sat on the floor with my back against the heater, holding that picture like it was glass. The apartment smelled like leftover Chinese takeout and Windex. The TV was on, but muted. Some new sitcom flickering in the corner. I didn't care. All I could hear was that hum, that static hum from 1969, the one that filled the room when the captain didn't come. I don't know what made me call Sally that night. I hadn't talked to her in a couple of weeks. She was still living at home, commuting to a nearby college, taking art classes, and working nights at the old drive-in theater that still somehow hadn't shut down. She picked up on the third ring. "Hey," I said. "Hey, stranger," she answered, chewing something. Probably now and laters. What's up? Just thinking about the wall. She paused. You mean the drawings? Yeah. You know they painted over them, right? I saw. Silence. Still have the photo? She asked. Yeah. You? Yeah. And then without even planning it, we talked for hours. About nothing. About everything. About old toys and TV dinners. About Mr. T and Sonny and Cher. About how the Atari never really worked unless you jammed a pencil under the cartridge just right. About the way Mom's slippers used to shuff on the kitchen tile. About the day she cried and the day we drew. I think, she said at one point, that the wall wasn't magic. I think it was just us. We made it matter. She was right, of course. But still I missed it. Not because it was beautiful. God no, it was a disaster. But because it was real. Because it held a moment. A dozen moments. All tangled together in scribbles and silence and forgiveness. That night after we hung up, I pinned the photo to the corkboard above my tiny desk, right next to my overdue electric bill and a coupon for Squeeze-Its that had long since expired. And the next morning, before work, I stopped by the Goodwill down the street and bought a cheap frame. I put the photo inside, cleaned the glass, and set it on my nightstand, because the wall might be gone, but the sound remains, and so does the feeling. It was the spring of 1985, and Sally had just finished her BFA in illustration. She was 21, full of ideas, full of sketches, full of those trapper-keeper folders she never let anyone touch. I was 26, living on my own for a few years by then, renting a duplex with windows that leaked in the rain and a landlord who couldn't fix anything without duct tape and a roll of profanity. I still had that framed photo of the crayon captain on my nightstand. Still dusted it. Still looked at it before bed like a relic, like a kind of prayer. Sally had called a week earlier. She was moving to Chicago for a gallery internship and wanted to meet up one last time before leaving. We picked a burger chef halfway between our places, one of the last ones still open. The parking lot was cracked and growing weeds, the plastic chairs inside were faded, and the Pepsi-free fountain tap hadn't worked since Reagan's first term. But the fries were still hot and the jukebox still played Hall & Oates, and that was enough. We sat across from each other, her with her sketch pad, me with my old work boots kicked under the booth just like we used to. Her hair was shorter now, styled into one of those soft mullets girls wore back then, and she wore a Def Leppard pin on her jacket just to confuse people. I ordered a double cheeseburger and a tab, mostly for nostalgia. She smirked. So, she said, you still watching Saturday morning cartoons? Only when the VCR doesn't eat the tape. She laughed. Still taping things off TV? Course. Got a whole shelf full of stuff you can't find anywhere. Last month I taped Knight Rider, Silver Spoons, and an old episode of Solid Gold with Marilyn McCoo that nearly made me cry. You always were a sentimental sap. I nodded. You too. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small square envelope. I made you something, she said, sliding it across the table. Inside was a hand-drawn cassette sleeve. On it, a sketch of a living room. Our living room. The Zenith TV, the crayon wall, the scratchy rug, 2 kids in pajamas, one holding a doll, the other a blue crayon. I looked up and she shrugged. I found the tape, from that day. The audio. Remember when we tried to record shows with that crummy little cassette player? My chest tightened. You kept it? She nodded. I labeled it Tuesday Static. Thought you might want to hear it again. That night I didn't go straight home. I parked at the old drive-in theater, long since shut down and boarded up, and sat in my car with the windows cracked, smelling the spring grass and the first hints of coming summer. I slid the tape into my dashboard player, which clicked like it always did, and then, soft static, a pause, a hum, then me, 10 years old, saying, he's probably just late. Don't cry, okay? And then Sally's voice, soft and shaky, but what if he doesn't come? Then the sound of crayons scraping drywall, and somewhere in the background, the kitchen radio, playing what sounded like Build Me Up Buttercup. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. All of it. That moment. That house. That hush in the room before something arrived or didn't. It struck me then, how we carry certain days inside us like pocket change. Always there, always jingling faintly, not because they were grand or loud or full of fireworks, but because they were real, honest, kind. The next morning I dug out my own box of tapes and sat on the floor, fast-forwarding, rewinding, listening to old sounds, theme songs, commercial jingles, Laughter caught between segments. Somewhere in the middle of it, I realized I wasn't just remembering Sally. I was remembering me, who I was, who I tried to be, who I still hoped I could become. That weekend, I drove back to the old neighborhood again. The house was still there, porch still blue, blinds still wrong. But this time, I didn't stare from across the street. I walked up the driveway. There was a kid's tricycle tipped over in the yard and chalk drawings on the sidewalk. Smiling suns, crooked hearts, giant flowers with 8 petals. I rang the bell. A woman answered, baby on her hip. "Hi," I said. "Sorry to bother you. I used to live here, a long time ago." She smiled, hesitant but warm. I was wondering, would it be okay if I looked at the living room? Just for a second. She glanced over her shoulder. "Sure, just a minute." She let me in. And there it was. Different couch, new paint, toys everywhere. But the light, the way the morning light came in through the window, that was the same. And for just a moment, I could almost see him again. Captain Kangaroo, smiling faintly from a crayon stroke just beneath the surface.